So unless I'm missing anything, and I'll look to the others, without much further ado, I'd like to hand over to Amanda Howes and Jim Fleming from UKRI, who I'm very pleased to welcome here today and who have kindly agreed to provide an introduction. Thank you.
Thanks, Ryan. For anyone who doesn't know me, I'm Jim Fleming. I'm head of energy in EPSRC. Amanda is also on the call, who does all the work. But I'm speaking on behalf of ourselves and ESRC today, because obviously this is a joint activity between us and has been around energy demand for over a decade now, and a very successful one for us indeed. I should start by thanking Nick and all the CREDS team, all the PIs and co-Is and the admin team who've done such a great job over the last sort of 4 or 5 years, particularly around bringing sort of disparate parts of the community together in a really coherent way. And I think it really gives us an opportunity to build from a very strong position. I just quickly say, why are we interested in funding this centre in energy demand? Politically, obviously, it's incredibly important. It's almost impossible to read the newspapers without seeing a really relevant news article. And I think the importance towards energy security, which is obviously sort of one of the great topics of the day, I think is really really key. At the same time, taking a whole systems approach is sort of a fundamental part of BEIS's net zero and the UK net zero research and innovation framework. I'd say sort of energy demand reduction is a key part of both ourselves and ESRC's strategic delivery plans. And I think probably the key thing I'd stress here is the importance of interdisciplinarity, beautifully sort of outlined by the Committee for Climate Change, but perhaps particularly important for this particular area, and therefore sort of particularly important for us and ESRC to come together on this activity to fund. And then I think sort of just to reflect the importance of the area, just to say that actually sort of CREDS is not the only investment that we make in energy demand reduction. Actually, it's the single biggest, you're welcome, Nick. It's the single biggest research area we fund in net zero at the moment. So obviously the role of the champion, that's very much what you're here to learn about. But from our point of view, it's very much now about putting the consortium together that will go into the centre going forward sort of from here on. As I want to stress again, interdisciplinarity is absolutely key for us. I think probably one of the areas that CREDS might be able to improve is very, very strong on multidisciplinarity with a bit of interdisciplinarity. And I think we really want to see that flipped in the next centre to be really focused around interdisciplinarity with a bit of multidisciplinarity. Again, one of the things we really would like to see more of in the next centre is on impact and on knowledge exchange. I think possibly that relates back to my previous point on the politics of it all. And then just to stress, we have one invitation to put the centre together to be led by Mari and Sarah. They will then have the next few months to put the consortium together and some of the research themes together. They'll then put that to us, and in the ideal circumstances, we're looking to then fund a new centre. I was going to call it CREDS 2, but perhaps I should wait to see how the webinar progresses. And we're looking for a new centre to start around beginning of July 2023. So I think perhaps more importantly, perhaps to hand back over to Mari and Sarah for the next part of the webinar.
Thank you, Jim, and thank you, Ryan, and thank you everyone for coming today and hearing what our plan is and what our proposed plan is. So my name is Mari Matiskainen. I'm a senior research fellow at University of Sussex, and I'm one of the co-champions together with Sarah. And Sarah will present half of the presentation as well, and can then say hello as well. So I am currently a team lead in equity and justice in what is the current centre for research into energy demand solutions, and I'm also co-director of Sussex Energy Group. Can I have the next slide, Sarah? Thank you. So as Jim already said, you know, one of the reasons why we are here today is that we still really have a massive dilemma when it comes to energy demand. And we all know that we had this, what was titled British Energy Security Strategy back in April. And, you know, in that strategy, it says that we are still going to be relying a lot on gas to heat our homes and a lot of oil to fill our tanks in terms of transport for years to come. And electricity demand especially is highly likely to double by 2050. So this is a massive challenge in terms of thinking about, well, what do we do about the future? We have to get to net zero, but at the same time, our demand is still really likely to be increasing. And for instance, the Climate Change Committee has said that, you know, the current programs that we have in terms of the net zero, they won't actually get to net zero. So just kind of give you the kind of background of why we are today here, why it's really important that we actually get the whole community together to actually build a center that will make a difference in terms of reducing demand, making sure that we actually get to net zero by 2050, because we need to do that for climate reasons. And I think everyone in the room is hopefully aware of that. Next one. So I wanted to really also tell you a bit more about us and, you know, why we were chosen as champions. So we both basically have different backgrounds. We have a experience of leadership in terms of academic leadership roles. So we both have been leading centers and projects and different initiatives. We are interdisciplinary in terms of, I come from social sciences and Sarah comes from engineering. We have different career stages. So Sarah is a full professor and has been a professor for a long time. So she's much more senior than I am. We have a geographical spread. So I'm down in Brighton and it's actually really lovely and sunny today. And Sarah is up at Newcastle. And I think it might be sunny in Newcastle as well today, but we have, you know, different geographical spread in terms of where we are located in the UK. And I think that's a real strength. We are really fully committed to EDI, and this is something that the panel particularly liked, that, you know, EDI is not just a tick box for us, you know, final paragraph at the end of a proposal, but it's something that we integrate into how we do sort of proposed research, just from starting questions all the way to the process and what we actually, how we disseminate our research. I am involved in CREDS. I have been a part of CREDS from the early days, so from the original proposal, and Sarah is new to CREDS, so she can bring a new fresh insight into the center. And our vision really is to develop a center that will be interdisciplinary. Like Jim mentioned already, it's really important that we actually think about how we are going to do that. Interdisciplinary research is really difficult to achieve, but it's something that we are fully committed to. We want to have an inclusive center. We want it to be diverse, and we want to make sure that we take methodologically rigorous research that can be applied at speed and scale for significant impact. And long term, we want to make sure that energy demand reduction is really at the foundation of a fair transition to net zero. And this is really key in terms of thinking about where we are now and the current energy crisis and how it's affecting everyone across society, not just necessarily people who are on very, very low incomes, but it's actually affecting everyone. And our main objectives are to develop an inclusive, interdisciplinary and cross-sectoral center. We want to deliver robust and reflexive research. We want to promote energy demand reduction as equal to supply side. And we all know that supply side is often much more focused on and has got a lot more coverage than demand side. We want to make sure that people are aware of the wider benefits of energy demand reduction. And we want to really integrate EDI in our research process. And we are looking forward to engaging and networking widely with everyone in terms of our stakeholders. And we want to really build collaborative, open and supportive teams and think about what does a good work-life balance, for instance, look like. And to do that, we have been funded for 8 months, and our action plan is to undertake a consultation, to do a co-development, and then also build the consortium. And I'll hand over to Sarah now for the rest of the slides. Thank you.
Thanks, Mari. So in terms of the 8 months of activity and the engagement and consultation that we're doing, then we've been focusing on 2 key areas. One is the research community and one is the non-research stakeholders. But the community we've started in terms of our community engagement, talking to members of the existing CREDS project. And we've been conducting interviews through September and October with key members of the CREDS team. We've also been really fortunate to have the midterm review information from the CREDS project that enables us to think about the areas for improvement, but also the areas of strength that were identified there. And so that's helped us to focus on what's working well, what could be improved, and what might be the future objectives moving forward. And all of these meetings have been held confidentially so that people have been able to identify and discuss in an open way what they feel the strengths and weaknesses are and how we might address some of those.
Sarah, would you just try moving a bit closer to the microphone? I think there's some hearing issues. See if that helps.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, I'm a bit croaky this morning. So in terms of these community events, the launch webinar itself is part of our community engagement, talking to research stakeholders. But we have a range of other stakeholders that we want to engage with, including policymakers, including members of the industry sector, non-governmental organisations. And so we've got a survey that we are in the process of launching, which will be ready in October. Once the initial results of some of the community engagement and stakeholder survey is available, we want to reflect on that and play it back to key stakeholders in November to get further views from them through a series of online workshops. So those workshops will really start to flesh out some of the potential research themes that we're seeing as important through the engagement that's happened. So the workshops will build on the CREDS interviews, but also the survey will feed forward into research themes and challenges that have been identified and the methods that we plan to use in the workshops. We'll be using World Cafe and storytelling type techniques. And that enables us to be quite reflexive in terms of our own understanding of what the community and the researchers feel are still outstanding research questions and themes that should continue for the centre. By November, we expect to be putting out a call for co-investigators, because we will be much clearer on the themes and challenges, not just from myself and Mari's point of view, but from the community's point of view of what should be included. And so we'll be putting out a call, and within that we'll be thinking about what key skills we need, what research questions we think the consortium will need to answer, what kind of engagement and impact activities we think are important, and be looking for commitment from co-investigators towards equality, diversity and inclusion and building that diverse community. So there's a frantic period of proposal writing in December through to February, when we'll be collaborating with those co-investigators on the proposal writing. And we have a deadline now that we know from UKRI for the 28th of February. The call document itself isn't issued yet, but based on conversations so far, we expect the call document will outline a grant value of 15 million for a 5-year period for the centre. So the centre itself will have a series of research themes, and we expect to have cross-cutting activities, which is how the cross-cutting activities really deliver this interdisciplinarity that Maury and Jim have already emphasised. We recognise already that, and as Jim mentioned, the CREDS community has come together and has produced a significant body of work which can continue to have impact so long as the new centre ensures that, that we continue to highlight and to promote the findings of the existing CREDS community. So we expect we'll be building on the previous key findings.
Sorry, Sarah, sorry to interrupt. Could you just move the microphone ever so slightly further away? Because I think it's now gone over.
Bit of feedback?
Yeah, I think that's a bit better.
Okay, thank you. So in terms of leadership as co-investigators, joining myself and Maury, we want to have embedded and diverse membership of the leadership team. We don't want that to just sit with us. So we want to distribute leadership roles within the consortium. So as a summary then of the key dates that we have coming up, we've had this internal consultation stage. We're having our launch webinar now. Mid-October to early November, we'll be having a survey available to stakeholders. That's including researcher stakeholders as well as non-researcher stakeholders. We've got stakeholder workshops penciled in on the 7th, 8th and 9th of November, just sorting out facilitators for that, and then we'll be able to send out save the dates for those. And by mid-November, we'll be putting out an open call for co-investigators with a deadline in December to give people enough time to respond to that. An open call for co-investigators. And during this time, we'll probably get lots of questions from people about how to get involved and the kinds of themes and leadership skills that we need. But come end of December through to February, we're sticking our heads down and getting the proposal writing done. Some of that activity will still involve stakeholder consultation. We're really keen to continue that engagement throughout the proposal writing stage, ready for our submission on the 28th of February. So overall, we know that, and we're really pleased that UKRI agree that energy demand reduction is an area that is important for investment and is important for further research. The International Energy Agency has identified the amount of savings that energy efficiency potentially could deliver. It's a worldwide problem, not just a UK problem. So it's the opportunity for international impact here. I'll hand back to Maury.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for running through those slides. I did offer if I could, if you wanted me to do this presentation, given your croakiness, but thank you so much for that, Sarah. And we look forward to taking questions now. So I think I can see first one is Gavin. How will the stakeholder survey be distributed? Can we suggest people to send it to? Yes, we will work with the survey company, and we would expect to send out the survey to as many people as possible. So yes, please, we would really look forward to suggestions of who to send it to. Obviously, we will use the existing CREDS email list, the Energy Demand Research Network, our contacts at UKERG, Sussex Energy Group, SuperGen, SESI, all the various networks that there are already that we are aware of. And then there's a question from Rob about, is there an organogram we can see for how the overall project will be structured and administered? That is, at the moment, we have a draft plan, but that's something that we will finalize following our consultation. So
It's worth saying, I think, just on top of that, that the way that these themes are going to be interconnecting with one another, and therefore what the requirements for a core team supporting that is going to be, is obviously going to be a major factor in how the program is ultimately managed and structured. So yeah, it does feel a bit too early to really know for sure where that's going to head towards. But you know, there's best practice out there for what a structure might look like. You know, centre managers, comms managers, administrators, and the like. But clearly, individual themes are going to need their own kinds of support, and we're kind of reviewing at the moment whether or not that's best sat within a core team or via some other structure. But yeah, we definitely want to hear the views of people who are involved in the COI process before we make any final decisions on that, because I think everyone's got something to say on that, I think.
yeah, thanks, Ryan. I think the next question is, I'm just trying to keep up with all the questions. How many themes do we envisage? We haven't put a number on how many themes. I think it's more important that we actually cover the, you know, the research gaps and the challenges that need to be addressed. So we don't have a number of that yet. Next one is, what form will the COI call take? Resource plans or just background general ideas? Actually, Sarah, do you want to run through a little bit about the COI process? Thank you.
Yeah, so what we plan to do for the COI process would be, yes, to publish the criteria for the COIs and to set a series of questions for potential co-investigators to answer. So those questions would be around what kind of networks and communities you're currently involved in that the project would benefit from, things like what you feel your research strengths are and what kind of research questions you would intend answering if joining the community. In terms of is it a kind of full costed application, then no, we're not expecting resourced plans. It would be general ideas, but we're planning on trying to do this anonymized. So looking for information around what specifically you think you can bring to the project and to the consortium by way of skills, by way of knowledge, by way of research questions that you'd like to address. The process then, in terms of once we've received those, would be to do an initial long list, and if we felt that we needed assistance with shortlisting or needed to reach out to individuals in order to ask for more information, to do that at that point. But we're trying to ensure that we take a transparent approach to this. And in terms of do people taking part in projects get added in during the bid writing process? Ideally, we want to ensure that we're able to identify individuals through the COI call, excuse me, who we might then bring together in particular theme areas to work with other shortlisted co-investigators in order to broaden and work on the writing of a theme together. We might still then identify certain skills or knowledge that theme needs that isn't necessarily met by the co-investigators that we've identified, and perhaps then we might look to fill those gaps. But ideally, we want to find all of our co-investigators through the application process because it's the most transparent, open and fair way to do that we think. Thanks, Mari.
Thanks, Sarah. And next one is Matthew. Will the survey be sent to everyone who is registered for this webinar? Yes, we will send it to everyone. Catherine, about who decides who the non-academic stakeholders are and what if they do not have a voice stroke email address. I'm thinking here of hard to reach communities like SMEs. That's a really good point, and that's a really good question. And that was one of the things that when we applied for this, we specifically thought about quite hard about how do we reach people that might not be so much engaged yet with our research community. So for instance, for our workshops, we are using professional facilitators, and one of the tasks for them is to make sure that our workshops are diverse and that we also get to reach people that are not necessarily involved yet in some of these debates. So that's something that is on the top of our list. Next question was about the process for selecting the PIs and co-Is, and I think, Sarah, you covered that already. I don't know if there's anything else that you wanted to add. The question is, do you know yet what process will be used to select the PIs and co-Is? I think that's, I don't know if you want to add anything more to what you said earlier. No. Then to double check whether this is a UK-wide consultation. Yes, this will be UK-wide consultation. One of the objectives for us also is that even though we are located in England, we are very aware that we need to do research that is, you know, goes across the UK, and also we want to make sure that we take best practice examples from international experience. So the centre will be UK based, but we will also look, you know, wide UK wide, but also looking out what's out there, out of this country. So is the call for co-Is about your leadership team? Anyone named in a project funded would be a co-I on the application, I guess. Do people just taking part in a project get added in during the bid writing process? Sarah, do you want to add anything more to that? You answered that some already a little bit, but.
Sorry, can you repeat that? I was
So
answering.
it's a question from Greg. Is the call for co-Is about your leadership team? Anyone named in a project funded would be a co-I on the application, I guess. Do people just taking part in project get added in during the bid writing process?
So I touched on that a little bit. Ideally, we would want to ensure that we're aware and actively choosing all of the co-investigators at the point of the co-I call, rather than have people added later because of a particular project. But we do recognise that once we start the writing process and are developing research themes, that we might still identify particular gaps in the consortium that would usefully be filled. But so people could be added as co-investigators later, but we'd prefer not to do that because then it hasn't gone through the same kind of transparent process. But I did answer Gillian's question in the chat about whether researchers can be co-investigators, and so long as it fulfills UKRI rules, then yes. And so RAs can be researcher co-investigators.
Thank you, Sarah, for that. Next question is Milena's question about what will the criteria be for selecting co-Is and will they be published? And this goes back to the same process. So Sarah, I'll let you answer that too.
Yeah. So I tried to address that before in the comments. Yes, the criteria will be published. It'll all be part of the call document that goes out for new co-investigators. So it'll be quite clear what criteria we're looking for.
Thank you. The next question is from Sam, which says that a start date of 1st of July leaves a lot of early career researchers on fixed term contracts ending in April out of work for 3 months. Given your focus on EDI, is there any plan on ensuring that ECRs can be involved in the centre and are not forced to find funding elsewhere? So on that one, we will work really closely with UKRI on this, particularly thinking about ECRs and ECR support, because that's something that, again, you know, it's very close to our heart. We want to make sure that the really good work that CREDS has already done on ECRs is taking forward into the next phase. And the same goes also for PhD students, thinking about how we can bring over PhD students that are currently involved in the current phase. So in terms of the contracts, I don't know whether Amanda or Jim, you might have anything to say to this.
Sorry, on the gap between sort of the end of April and the 1st of July. Yeah, there's not really much we can do about that other than we can sort of, if there are particular issues, we can talk to sort of the Creds 1 team, and maybe if there are particular things that we can sort out there, we can do that. But the Creds, sorry, can't remember exactly when Creds 1 finishes, but I think is it September, October. So
December.
there's a what?
It's December now.
December.
Yeah.
So there's a relatively good overlap between the projects finishing at the moment.
Thank you, Jim, and thanks, Amanda. So, and the next question is from Spiros about, would the stakeholder workshops involve the COIs? Are they separate groups? That again is a really good question. We will actually run the workshops before the COIs are selected. So there is a chance that some of the future COIs might be involved in the workshops, but of course we will not know that at that point because we wouldn't have done the application process yet.
It's just worth just coming in there, Mari. So there's the first set of online workshops, which are kind of early November. So that is kind of the co-development phase, working with stakeholders that to kind of flash out future strategy or what the vision might look like, or what the themes might be. Once the COIs are identified as part of the November-December process, we'll actually be bringing people together for face-to-face meetings in January. So there's one that's planned towards the start of January for a day and a half in Sussex, and then there'll be another one later on in January for a day. So that smaller group of, that leadership team is kind of potentially been described in the comments there, will come together for face-to-face sessions with the opportunity to join online. Of course, people aren't able to make it, but ultimately we would hope that we can get people in a room to be able to flesh out the project and ready to kind of move electronically for those kind of final few weeks ahead of submission at the end of February.
Thank you, Ryan. Thanks for pointing that out. Yes, so we will have in-person writing workshops for the final COIs once they have been selected. So thanks for that. Yes, there are other. Noel had says that there are, other communities to reach beyond SMEs, people living low carbon lifestyles. Yes, that's a really good point. And again, we want to make sure that we engage widely throughout our process. So that's a really, really good point. And I think Gillian's question on people on DI money, I think that was already answered. Sarah answered that. So thanks for that. And then Paul is having a question about how will interdisciplinary work. It sounded like that themes are decided and announced as a call for COI, e.g. then 2 COIs are chosen from different institutions and then told to work together. Well, actually, we are not sort of saying yet what the research themes or what the challenges might be. We expect all of them to be cross-cutting and interdisciplinary and also across different institutions. But we wouldn't tell someone that, okay, this is the person that you have to work with. It's once the final COIs have been chosen, then we'll look how the leadership team works together and how the themes actually then fit together, or the challenges, however we end up calling them. Sarah, I don't know, do you have anything to add for that question?
I don't think so. I would hope that by virtue of the strengths that are in the COI applications, that it would become quite clear which sub-teams are developing through the co-investigators as we identify who overlaps with which themes that we've asked for support with.
Yeah, thank you. And then Grant is asking a question about, do you have a view on strengthening international engagement more formally in the centre? This again is a really good point, and obviously COVID impacted a lot of the international activities, for instance, that the first phase of Creds had planned. So as long as we can, again, travel and go and see people, a lot of people seem to be having COVID again. So I think you know, we definitely want to have more international engagement, bring people over, make sure that people from the new center can also go and visit other universities elsewhere. So that's something definitely that we want to build on. In terms of how formal that would be and what the structures for that would look like, that is again something that we will finalize through the consultation process. And then David is asking about how do you propose to secure stakeholder input from non-research communities, especially policymakers? Sarah, do you want to take this question? You mentioned already about our engagement coming up in the early year.
Yeah, so so what we're hoping to do here is to have some deliberative workshops. Those workshops are online to try and reduce travel and time barriers for people to contribute. And we already have quite good links through existing projects with policymakers at local, regional and national level. But in terms of then securing that stakeholder input, then we plan on using professional facilitators to help with the event. And the purpose of that is to really identify the evidence base and therefore research questions that policymakers really feel that they need in order for stronger policy initiatives in the energy demand space.
Thank you. Jake is asking a question about, can you say a little bit more about how you are defining stakeholders of energy demands? Initially, we were saying they're quite usual, sort of, I suppose we all use often, you know, you think about policymakers, you think about other researchers, industry, business, NGOs, charities. And this is something that we want to also make sure that when we go through, particularly with our workshops, that the facilitators that we work with actually could find people that we don't necessarily always engage that strongly with. And here particularly we are thinking about, for instance, community and charity sector that might not be involved that much yet in some aspects of our research. And next question is from Gillian about, will you be looking at matched funding, and at what point is the process in the process is this going to start to happen? So actually that question on matched funding, Jim, I will ask that for you if that's all right.
So we don't have targets that we're expecting the centre to meet in terms of so pound notes, either cash or in kind. What we are though expecting is fairly significant engagement, both for the start of the program, but also to develop that further as the centre progresses. So in terms of matched funding, then no, we don't have any particular targets, but we will expect to see fairly significant degrees of engagement with well, basically a lot of the people that Sarah's just described.
Thank you. And then the next question is from Matthew about, can the centre fund comparative work by collaborators in other countries? We would very much welcome international collaboration, but of course, in terms of whether we can bring people into the centre that are based in other countries, that's something that we need to double check with funders rules. So I don't know, Amanda or Jim, whether you have anything to say to that, whether researchers, for instance, could be based in other institutions outside the UK.
Yeah, we have fairly strict guidance whether they could be investigators, but we do sort of have do allow for visiting fellows and sort of travel to international partners. At the same time, without going into an awful lot of detail, there will be other opportunities to link, there will be funds available for international working that they will be competitively approached, but we would expect sort of the centre to probably look to engage in those funds.
Yeah, thank you. Next question is from Daniel. Roughly how many COIs are you expecting to have? Again, that depends on the number of our final research themes, stroke challenges, so that's yet to be decided. And then Gillian has a question of, to what extent will the co-I selection be based on the detail of their research ideas? If this is a big part of the criteria, how transparent will you be? There is a lot of intellectual property given over in this kind of process, and people need some assurance that their ideas are protected. Sarah, do you want to add a little bit more about that in terms of the process for co-Is in that question?
So it's a very fair point around you know, the intellectual property of ideas that might be put forward. So the co-investigator applications are anonymized. We don't plan on being able to identify names alongside the applications. Any identifying features will be removed before these are long listed. These will not be shared beyond the shortlisting and long listing panel. And so even at the point of appointment of co-investigators, then co-investigators would not see each other's applications. The applications would remain confidential in the same way that a job application is kept confidential. In terms of, I can't remember the other part of Gillian's question, sorry.
Oh, about intellectual property.
Aside from the intellectual property, there was something a bit earlier, wasn't there, about?
So this was about, so to what extent will the co-I selection be based on the detail of their research ideas? If this is a big part of the criteria, how transparent will you be?
Okay, yeah. Okay. So I think I've covered transparency in that the applications are not shared beyond the panel that are doing the selection. How much of it is on the research ideas? Well, there will be other criteria. That's not the only criteria, and the criteria will be published. So we will be looking at what networking skills people bring, what commitment they have to equality, diversity and inclusion, what leadership skills they bring to the consortium. So it's not only about is the research question that you want to pursue brilliant. And I think Gillian's other comments elsewhere in the chat around you know, using some of the existing CREDS work and CREDS branding and not being punished too much for building on rather than throwing everything away and doing something completely new and novel that doesn't touch on stuff that's gone before. And we certainly recognize that, and that's why we're going through this process now. We recognize that there's elements of work that's previously been done that still has space and need to expand and be worked on. And there may be other elements that have run their natural course, and now much of the work can be on the impact rather than extending and expanding on the research questions. And so, yes, the criteria are not just the research question, the research application will be confidential. And yes, we expect that some of the research proposed will be building on rather than brand new novel.
Thank you. Robert says that he works in the alumni office and has the Sussex alumni running SMEs in the UK, and they could look at whether any of these organizations want to be involved in the research. That's brilliant. Thank you so much. Please you know, get in touch via email. In fact, Ryan, would you mind putting Sarah and my email addresses in the chat again? Thanks. Colin is asking about how will you involve the input from the energy sector workforce and other sectoral employees? That is a really good point, because industry is something that we definitely want to engage more with. So Colin, if you would be able to be in touch and, for instance, circulate our survey to your networks, that would be absolutely brilliant. So thank you for that. CREDS branding, we've touched on that already. And Amy is asking, at the start of the centre in July, do you intend to have gone through a recruitment process for all roles, i.e. be starting with a full team? What will be the recruitment process for this? So so yes, we would want to have at least the main leadership and core team roles in full place by July. And in terms of the recruitment process, this will be the usual university recruitment process that we would have for any roles within institutions. Paulus is asking about, could you give rough idea on the list of priority topics given, please, sectoral or stakeholder based or anything else? So like I said before, I have my kind of, pet topics, like Sarah has probably hers, and there are some sort of topics that we feel very strongly about, but we want to make sure that we do the consultation before we actually finalize the themes or the research challenges. But one of the things is that it's going to be cross-cutting, it's going to be cross-sectoral, and it's going to be interdisciplinary and cross institutions as well. Caroline is asking about, will there be early calls for research ideas through some sort of flexible funding approach, for example, built in during this bid writing phase? We will expect to have some kind of a flexible fund as part of the centre, but again, that's something that we will finalize details of later, well, during the consultation process. So we don't want to say too much about that yet. And Sarah has touched on the CREDS being in an unfunded extension. So this doesn't actually protect most of the early career researchers involved. And that's something that, we touched on earlier as well. And perhaps there is something as we, as a community research community, can take back to also partly to the funders in terms of how these processes would be best done so that we can protect people's jobs as well. So Sam has also mentioned about that same issue, and Gavin as well. So yes, we recognize that there is an insecurity issue with the contracts. And Hongan has asked about, in CREDS research team has diverse team members from different institutes. Would you be able to talk more about how each theme of this proposal will be organized? Yes, we mentioned that already, that we want multiple institutions within a challenge or a theme. So we want them to be across different institutions. Linus has asked about, will the current CREDS website be maintaining all the outputs transferred to a new website? There's a lot of great work on there, and I imagine the next centre will be building on. So the website is one of the definitely one of the strengths of the current centre, and we are in talks with the current core team about thinking about how best to preserve that. And I think Oxford owns the website at the moment, so that's something that we need to also discuss with Nick in terms of how to do that. We would definitely want to keep as much as the current centre structures as we can. And Gillian's question about will the workshops be structured to identify the bits of work of CREDS 1 that merit continuation? Yes, like we said before, we want to build on things that have been done in the past, rather than just reinvent the wheel unnecessarily, and also make sure that we can continue building impact from research that has been done in the centre thus far. I'm really conscious that I have about 50 messages that I haven't replied to yet. So Rhiannon, Kate and Ryan, are there any specific topics that we haven't touched on yet that we should do? Because I'm conscious we have 6 minutes left. There's a really good point from Charlotte. Can stakeholder organizations, so for example, NGOs or non-academic institutions, be included in the research consortium, or will they only be eligible to be subcontractors? UK rules on this change with different calls. Jim or Amanda, do you have any information on that? I personally would really welcome non-academic institutions to be included in the research consortium, because that's a really great way of building impact from research as well.
I'll go first, but I might leave this over because Amanda probably knows the rules better than I do. But I would say our rules don't change from call to call, although I would say these are EPSRC rules. Having said that, there are changes with public research establishments and their eligibility. Those are undergoing change across UKRI at the moment, and I'm not entirely sure where we are with those. Amanda, can I hand over to you on that?
Yeah, so there are some that are eligible and some won't be, so that's not very helpful, but our website is kept up to date, and I will make sure that so in the call document that Mary and Sarah get, there will be a link to the current eligible organisations, so they at that point they will know who is eligible. But at this stage there are still discussions underway, so if I say now what's eligible, I could be out of date by the time they actually submit. So yeah, but it is changing, but some are eligible and some aren't at this stage, but there was a list clearly defined on the website, and I will make sure that they have that as part of the call process.
Thank you. So next question was from Paul about how the co-Is will be chosen. Are they chosen by myself and Sarah? Sarah, that goes back to the co-I selection process. So can you answer that?
Yeah, so I think what we probably want to think about is who else we want to involve in that decision-making process in order for it to be fair and transparent. We're trying to ensure that the process reduces potential biases by anonymizing the applications, and certainly a decision-making panel of 2 is not enough. In order to have some diverse views on the skills and the research questions being proposed, but equally we need anyone that we do co-opt into that process to be aware of the need for confidentiality, as mentioned previously with the intellectual property issue.
Yeah, thank you. And one of the things, just to touch on that, one of the things that we said, for instance, in the proposal, that Sarah and I will do unconscious bias training before we do that, before we start the consultation process. So so I've just done mine at Sussex, just to make sure that we also, you know, refresh our training on that before we do any selection criteria or any selection processes. So our next question about reflecting on Jim's remarks about interdisciplinarity, and it seems very important, and how do we envisage fostering this within the new phase of the centre? And again, like I mentioned, you know, so we want to do cross institutions, cross disciplines. We want to make sure that our topics and our challenges and our themes are interdisciplinary. And one of the things really is when we get together with the co-Is and when we do the working, there's a writing workshops, for instance, is to actually think about and reflect on that what do we mean by interdisciplinary, for example? What does it mean? It might be different things for different people depending on their disciplines, where they come from. So this is something really that we need to get right from the start. Kanika is asking about how do we plan to increase our focus in the global south. That again is a really good question and really important question, and like I said before, we want to make sure that we use international examples as well and not just focus on the global north in this sense. And Colin is saying that as an NGO, trade unions can provide anonymized access to charity workers, given a large volume of charity workers are also trade union members. Similarly, we have access to international groups. That's brilliant, Colin. Thank you so much for that. And please be in touch. So, and Gillian is asked about the application, how can it be treated as anonymous? There seem to be a lot of questions about the anonymous process. So, but I think Sarah has covered that a lot already and quite well covered most of it. So please, you know, email us, and if you have any more questions, and we will put this also into the notes from the webinar, explain that in detail. I think we have 1 minute left. Is there any question that well, there are still lots of questions, but is there any question there, Ryan, Rhiannon, or Kate, you can see in the chat that is something that we haven't really touched on at all yet? Anything at all?
Hi. Yes, so going through the list here, there's a lot of common questions clearly around the COI process and the identification, ensuring this is how this is going to link together into an effective centre. Some of that is obviously food for thought for the team to be considering in the construction of how this process is going to work out in practice, but there's also concerns there that I think we need to address through our Q&As, which we'll be coming back to everybody on. Obviously, there's a lot of questions here that we'll be constructing some answers for over the next few days to send out as promptly as we can, because clearly there are concerns. There's nothing in particular I can spot here that hasn't been covered already. In some form or another. Clearly there's this concern here with this gap between April and July, but to the best of my knowledge, looking at Amanda and Jim, ultimately the timescales are already condensed as it is. Clearly there's a decision-making process that needs to happen on the EPSRC side before the funding is made, and then there's the setup that needs to happen. And likewise with recruitment, obviously that gap's not going to give a huge amount of opportunity to go out to get a core team in place in time for that launch. But you would imagine centre managers and such like being in place very, very soon after.
Yeah.
Over to Jim, if you've got anything to add.
Yeah, no, so that timescale is one that sort of we've discussed quite extensively with Sarah and Mari to what we think is the most effective one. Obviously, people can be named researchers in the proposal when it comes to us from the team. Sorry, it's catching Sarah's brokenness. So if there are particular issues that need to be addressed between people who are funded on who are employed on the current CREDS grant, then we can talk to the current CREDS team if they're also then named on that. But at the same time, we do not have a blank check that we can just fund absolutely everything. But if there are particular issues where retention becomes an issue between the two parts of the centres, then we can certainly sort of have that conversation, but it'd be with CREDS 1, it wouldn't be with CREDS 2.
Thank you, Jim. And just a quick point, Sarah put it in the chat as well, that she has done this same type of COI process in 2 different centres, and from your experience, Sarah, that worked really well, and people seemed quite happy with it as well. So we have trust in the process. Right. Well, I'm conscious of the time. It would be really great to chat with you for a long time. But thank you so much, everyone coming today. And you have our email addresses. Please get in touch. Please look out for the survey, and please look out for the invitations for the workshops. And we really look forward to engaging with as many of you as possible. So please do come forward. And you know, this is a huge challenge, and it's not just challenge for us in terms of setting up the next centre proposal, but just thinking about how we as a research community, whether you happen to be involved in the next phase or not, can actually make sure that we get to net zero, to actually make sure that we reduce demand, and we make sure that energy demand is in the centre of a fair net zero transition. So thank you very much for coming, and we look forward to seeing you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you all.